Hello everybody, this is Refresh and I am here to take a look at the Ashoik Planeswalker deck from Magic the Gathering from Theros Beyond Death. On the back it says, this is Ashoik, Sculptor of Fear. Ashoik is a strange, enigmatic being with the power to torment foes by conjuring their darkest memories, fears, and regrets. Fill your graveyard along with your opponents for massive value as you slowly drive them insane. You get a deck box, 60 card deck which you can play tabletop or online, and two 15 card booster packs, as well as a strategy insert and two reference cards. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's inside. Here's our Ashoik Sculptor of Fear. This is a 6 mana Ashoik Planeswalker with 4 loyalty. For +2, you draw a card. Each player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. For -7, put target creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And for -11, gain control of all creatures target opponent controls. So powerful if you can get up there. Now, as you notice, there's something weird with the framing of this card, and it's a little bit cut off, a little bit too much to the left here. So that's a little unfortunate, and it's got a little curl to it. Here's the deck box with some Ashoik, what happened to their face, who knows. Let's go ahead and take a look at what's inside. Alright, here's our deck, our 2 packs of Theros Beyond Death, and our strategy insert. Alright, what we get here is a little bit of information about who Ashoik is. It's not that much information, but it's a bit of information on how to play the deck. This is very vague. It doesn't actually give you information on what to do with specific cards, so it's not that helpful, but hopefully there is enough information here to give you a start, and then I would recommend going somewhere else to see what this deck really does. And then we have some information about the mechanics that this deck will feature. On the back there is a guide to what Planeswalkers are and how to use them. This is important because they're complex cards and they're not exactly obvious how they work from just looking at the card. Let's take a look at the deck. Ashoik's Forerunner appears to be the rare for this deck, and it's a 5 mana 3/3 human wizard with flash, and when it enters the battlefield you grab Ashoik. So it's a way to possibly trade or even eat one of your opponent's smaller creatures and then grab Ashoik, which isn't the worst thing in the world. The Swimmer in Nightmares appears to be Ashoik's uncommon. It's a 1/4 Nightmare Merfolk, and it gets +3/+0 as long as there are 10 or more cards in a single graveyard. So that makes this a 4/4 when you are able to mill enough cards. And Swimmer in Nightmares can't be blocked as long as you control an Ashoik Planeswalker. That's not going to happen that often, but it is a nice perk for this uncommon. Mindrak Harpy appears to be the common for this deck, and it is a 4 mana 3/2 enchantment Harpy with flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, each player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. So this is what helps enable the mill theme and fattening those graveyards for escape and or other power-up capacities. Here's a tip card about how Planeswalker works and your turn, as well as how to do combat damage and a little bit more about attacking and blocking. This is the code that you can use to grab this deck online. I've already done so these numbers don't mean anything anymore, but it's nice that it comes with a digital version of this deck, so when you can't play it in person, you can play it online. Now that I have looked through this deck a bit, I'm going to play it against its partner in Elspeth, and I'll be back to let you know what I think. So I've had a chance to play with this deck a little, and I have some thoughts. The first one is that there is actually a good amount of synergy in this deck. This is a deck that is interested in putting cards into your own graveyard so that you can get extra value from it. And that is really exemplified here by the deck's rare, which is Gravebreaker Lamia. The ability to search your library for a specific card and put it into your graveyard lets you use the escape mechanic, which is the signature mechanic of this particular deck, to fix whatever problem that you need. Do you need an attacker? Then you can get the Underworld Charger and escape that. Do you need to draw a card? You can take the Glimpse of Freedom and escape that. Do you need to slow down your opponent? You can put the Sleep of the Dead in your graveyard and escape that. And a lot of the deck otherwise generally tries to mill yourself. So the Towering Wave Mystics, for example, can mill 2 cards when it deals combat damage. And what you want to be doing is that you want to mill yourself so that you can get additional advantage. Having your escape cards in your graveyard, like the Pharika Spawn, the Underworld Chargers, the Glimpses of Freedom, and the Sleep of the Dead, just means that you have more cards that you can cast. Yes, it does cost other cards in the graveyard when you use Escape, and it will cost more mana than the original cost of the card. But it's basically cards that you can use later, provided that they're in the graveyard. Or you can play them first, and if they end up in the graveyard, you can use them again. And in both cases, it is a pretty strong effect. But one of the problems with this deck is that it is just a little dirtily and slow, and it doesn't have a lot in the way of defenses. So the defense problem is one that is exemplified by when it faces up against any aggro deck. There's just not much that you can do to block. Your strongest card to do so is Timurit Chosen from the Dead, because if you have enough black cards on the battlefield, then Timurit will give you a lot of toughness, and then you can get a little bit of life by removing cards from other graveyards. And so that's one way that you can survive, but the Devourer of Memory is not much of a blocker. The Towering Wave Mystic is not much of a blocker. In both cases, they will probably die in any instance that they block. The Alien Instructor is not much of a blocker. The Underworld Charger can't even block, and so you're not really able to do much in the way of defense until you get to 4 mana and you can cast the Fairy's Spawn. On the removal side, you only have 2 Myrish Grasps at 2 mana, and then Final Death, which is really slow at 5 mana. And in between then, somehow you have to survive while any other deck that has some sort of aggressive game plan beats you down. The deck has some tempo to try to keep you alive a little. In the 3 Sleeps of the Dead, you just tap your opponent's biggest attacker down, and so it won't attack for 1 turn, but that's pretty much all you're getting with that until you escape it. And the payoffs for escaping aren't really that present. I mean, the Gravebreaker Lamia is probably the best for it because it reduces the cost of your escape cards, but other than that, you're mostly trying to win with Devourers of Memory from milling, or just trying to go over the top of your opponent by making big Underworld Chargers, or sometimes getting 2-for-1s with the Fairy's Spawns. Those are pretty good. Maybe getting it through the air with a Mindrack Harpies, which are this deck's exclusive common, and it is used fairly well to self-mill, and you also get to mill your opponent, which isn't necessarily a good thing. If you can get Ashoik out, then you can steal a card from your opponent's graveyard, so probably that is what the Harpy is doing in this deck. But I think one of the problems with this particular deck, and the reason why it feels a little underpowered, is that it doesn't actually have like a top flight finisher. You're mostly going to be trying to win by casting Fairy's Spawn from your graveyard and getting a 2-for-1 or maybe a big Underworld Charger and trying to cut through that way. Because if it's not for that, or you're trying to get Ashoik out somehow, but if it's not for that, you don't have a lot of ways of cutting through except for Devourer of Memory and Mindrack Harpy, and the rest of the creatures are just bodies that are probably going to get run over in most of their games. And while there is a good amount of synergy here, the power level overall is fairly low. I wish that there was a reanimation target in the graveyard that you can bring back, and that is how you're going to win. Or if there were stronger escape cards that could be brought back to be even bigger and more dangerous threats. The Fairy's Spawn is the best that this deck does in this regard, and it's just, in the end, a 5/6 that, yes, it does force your opponent to sacrifice a non-Gorgon creature, but that may be fairly low impact. And so overall, I found that this deck is a little weak, and even for a Planeswalker deck, I found it to be fairly weak. And it also doesn't help that the only fixing in the mana base are 2 Unknown Chores, and these are terrible fixing cards because they basically eat up a second mana in order to correct for one of the colors that you're missing. And I almost wish that they were just 1 more island and 1 more swamp, because of how slow they can be if this is what you end up drawing and this is what you're relying on to get the missing mana that you have. So I'm not that impressed with this deck. I think it's too slow and a little too dirtily, and it doesn't have enough top end to really get there in the end. But if you like graveyard synergies, I think that there is a bit of a place for this. Or if you just like the character of Ashoik and you want to play that deck, then there is a place for this. But I've seen more effective Planeswalker decks like its sparring partner, Elspeth. So those are my thoughts about the Ashoik Planeswalker deck from Theros Beyond Death. If you've had experience with this deck, let me know if your experience concurs with mine in the comments below, or if it's different, let me know as well. And if there are ways to play this deck that I have not yet seen, also let us know in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my videos, you can hit subscribe. This was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.